I've never made gloves before because they look really scary. But now that it's finally time to face my fears, should I knit or crochet them? There's only one way to find out. In this video, I'll be trying to make a shortened version of the evening/opera glove. Is this a Christmas themed video in disguise? Perhaps. To keep some control variables, I'll be using the same 4-ply fingering yarn in black with 3mm needles and hook. I'll also be using the single crochet and stockinette stitches to keep things simple. Since winging it is a lifestyle on this channel, this video shall be no exception, and these chosen methods are by no means the only methods. First off, we'll start with the crochet glove, because it's what I did first. I'll then go through the knit version, followed by a comparison of the finished pair. One of the major differences between these two methods is that my chosen crochet method starts from the top down, with the fingertips being the top. I gather the reason for this is because starting the round with the magic circle leaves a much neater finish at the fingertips than working from the bottom up. On the plus side, it was easy to try on and fit my work with minimal risk of excessive unraveling, and I basically just added increases wherever I felt they were needed. And, as I discovered with my knit versus crochet shorts experiment, the crochet was likely faster to work up. But for the sake of this video, that was still to be determined. I also really liked that I didn't have to finish or bind off the edges after the last round, but with the tightness of the single crochet and the close fit, things felt a little bulky, and I kind of felt like I was working out on some weird resistance training contraption. Given the stiffness of the fabric, turning things inside out was actually kind of difficult.
Why are they so creepy?
So I decided to weave in the ends as I went, instead of leaving them all to the end when there would be much less room to maneuver. Although this might be improved by changing to half double crochet or above, I wanted to keep the coverage relatively similar. That being said, nothing but dread and impatience was keeping me from slip stitching the entire thing. You may have noticed that the crochet rounds aren't straight, and this is because each round shifts the stitches slightly. To avoid this, you can use shift stitches, but this hasn't always been foolproof in my experience, so I just decided to keep things simple for the sake of this comparison.
I connected all the fingers to make one big round. But if I just try it on, then you can see how they're connected here. And all you have to do from then onwards is just continue the round until you reach about here. So basically when your thumb starts is when you stop the round, and then we're going to add the thumb. Really, it's very simple. You can add decreases or increases depending on how your hand is shaped, but I'm just going to stick to a straight round because it looks straight enough for me here. And yeah, movement wise, it's a little stiff, but it actually feels a lot better than it did previously, so I don't know if I just stretched out the crochet. The fingers are a little bulky, but not as much as I was worried they would end up.
Yeah, I ended up having to add a bunch of decreases. Despite adding all stitches to the round, I was still left with gaps between the fingers, but this wasn't a big deal because they were really easy to close up with the existing tails. Following multiple rounds of what was essentially a 4-fingered sock, I then incorporated the thumb in the same way as the fingers, and it was a lot easier to do than I thought it would be. I wanted the most shrink-wrapped fit I could get, but little did I realise that covering the rest of the hand would mean many, many rounds of decreases that seemed both random yet frequent, and to be honest, doing it all freehand was pretty tedious. Although it's not quite the point of this video, I still think it's worth mentioning. Soon enough, but not soon enough if you get what I mean, I discovered that all the fitting and weaving I was doing had stretched out the fingers lengthwise, but not circumference-wise. And perhaps it's only anecdotal experience, but I've often found that my cotton crochet tends to lack the same elasticity that my cotton knitting has. Logically, this would mean that I couldn't decrease too much at the wrist, because the stretch just wasn't there. Was that just a guess? Unfortunately, no. Obviously, I decreased a little too much, and although it fit my wrist well, it also meant that the glove was difficult to put on. Again, there was barely any elasticity. However, I chose to live in denial for many rows thereafter. So here I am, undoing all of that denial, and dare I say, the unraveled yarn was probably as long as denial itself. I apologize profusely. Anyway, fitting everything as bespokely as I could was probably the hardest part of crocheting the glove, but crocheting the length was pretty straightforward. I mean, what is the arm, if not just a giant thumb? And I just got hit with a cursed Spy Kids memory that wasn't buried nearly deep enough. To be clear, I could have made everything even looser, but I still prioritized a closer fit. Although it still wasn't easy to put on, it was easier, and it fit well, but the fingers were still getting longer. Now for the knit version, which starts from the bottom to the top, or from the forearm to the fingertips, depending on which side of the planet you live on. To start, I used the tubular cast-on, since I figured it would give an elegant finishing. That being said, this is definitely a more complicated cast-on and isn't by any means the only option. Although personally, I think it's usually worth the effort, you wouldn't have caught me using it just a few months ago. I decided to cast on 10 more stitches than the crochet version, to make up for the difference in stitch size. Was it the right number? Only time would tell. This was the first time I used it for a plain stockinette, and to be honest, it wasn't anything to write home about. If anything, it was kind of disappointing. Nonetheless, it was already in my mental library of cast-ons, and it was still less bulky than a fold-over, but I'll be sticking with the 1x1 rib for this one. Progress was noticeably slower, but surprisingly not by that much. I switched to continental knitting, which helped a lot.
This is the crochet stretch, and this is the knit stretch. Although these two have both started at roughly the same circumference, this one is a tiny bit smaller. I could actually decrease and make everything a lot smaller since it will stretch to fit, but we'll see how that goes.
And let's be real, this is all relative. If you're a slow crocheter but a fast knitter, then you'll probably spend less time knitting and vice versa. The only objective truth is that more knit stitches are needed to cover the same area. Hot take, one single crochet stitch is equivalent to 2 knit stitches. Soon enough, I had finished the arm, and I added gradual knit together decreases along the sides. Checking the fit was a little fussy with the double-pointed needles in the way, but I still prefer them over the circular ones when working at this scale. To widen the gloves enough for the hand, I had to make specific increases for the thumb. This wasn't as easy to breeze through as the crochet version, since there were several factors to consider in the way the increases started. For example, the type of increases, and placement relative to the arm increases. So all in all, it took me a couple of tries to get it right. Eventually, the gusset was finally starting to look okay, and before I knew it was time to get started on the phalanges. It's also at this point that you add any stitches you may need, and I cast on a couple here and there. I'll admit it felt a little strange to use double-pointed needles with such a tiny round, but it was easier than it looks. Clearly, it was still a lot more effort than just using a single hook. Again, I used knit together decreases to taper the fingers as much as I could, and there was no real difference in difficulty between this and decreasing in crochet. However, it did make me think about whether or not I should have worked in the same direction for both gloves, as it would have made for a closer comparison. But then I just accepted that doing the same for both just wouldn't have done much for my curiosity. Tapering went well, and I finished off by cutting the yarn and threading it through the last round with a generous tail. With newly added stitches were newly added gaps, and I tried to steer my way around the fingers to pick up new stitches and avoid any holes. Devastatingly, I still ended up with many. Overall, I prefer working the fingers first instead of last, because you get to set the stitches instead of having to work with existing ones. I waited until after all the knitting was done to weave in the ends, since holes just kept appearing with each finger. Tragically, it was at this point that I realized that I preferred the wrong side, but it was already way too late. And to top that, the knit was so thin that I accidentally wove through to the other side several times, which wasn't great. Just in case you were wondering, I didn't time each glove, because it would include too many factors that were simply beyond the point of this comparison. For example, the time it takes to figure things out, unraveling, distractions, and just the idiosyncrasies we all have as knitters and crocheters. Personally, I found the crochet glove a lot easier to complete, but not that much faster. Despite the overall stiffness, I'd say the structure is an overall positive. If anything, it makes my hand feel protected. From what exactly, I'm not entirely sure, but I'll probably be needing it for my upcoming videos. If you tend to prefer regularity when working your projects, then I would likely recommend the knit more. Seeing as to get straight rounds in crochet, you have to factor in other methods to manipulate the shift, and in my experience, they're not always foolproof. The knit gloves provide a significant stretch and elasticity, and this combined with the lightweight quality of the fabric makes for a close fit without having to shape as much. In terms of yarn, The crochet gloves weigh approximately 47 grams and the knit only 32, which leaves a 15-gram difference. With a project this small, it may or may not be quite significant, as it's still a third of a 50-gram ball of yarn, so if for whatever reason you're working with limited yarn, knit is definitely the safer option. For a sturdier pair of gloves, I would probably go with crochet, but otherwise I would go with knit or pair a super lightweight yarn with a loose or lacy stitch to avoid the bulk and rigidity. But if you're only looking to make some simple gloves with minimal shaping and a basic fit, crochet is the easier option, but it may not look as fitted or feel as comfortable as the knit equivalent. Obviously, this is based on my personal opinion. As you can see, the question isn't so much which discipline is better than the other, but which one suits the project most. It goes without saying that the pros and cons in this video are specific to the goals for this project, and what may be seen as cons in the context of this comparison are actually just trade-offs in the bigger picture. And I'd be remiss not to acknowledge that this glove type is pretty biased in hindsight. These crochet gloves are chunky and require some breaking in. Although they're technically functioning, they lack the same elegance and dexterity provided by the knit, and that was kind of the whole point of making this specific type of glove. So I think I'll be recycling this yarn, and hey, maybe I'll use it to knit a matching pair. If you too would like to conquer your fear of making gloves, then I hope you found this video useful. Diving straight in was daunting, but it turned out to be really fun, and not nearly as difficult as I had always imagined. If anything, I'm looking forward to making my next pair. So which method would you go with? If you're already pretty experienced, what are your thoughts and preferences? Thanks so much for watching. Make sure to stay tuned for the next one to find out why I decided to make these gloves in the first place.